My name is Julian, and for 6 months I lived in the hallway of St. Jude's Hospital. My wife, Claire, had been the victim of a devastating car crash on a rainy Tuesday evening. The doctors told me to prepare for the worst. They said her brain had shut down, a fortress protecting itself from the trauma. I sat by her bed every day, holding her hand and reading her favorite poetry. I talked to her about our garden, about the trip to Italy we never took, and about how much I missed the way she hummed while she painted. Then, on a Tuesday, exactly 24 weeks after the crash, her fingers twitched. "Julian?" The voice was a whisper, raspy from months of disuse, but it was her voice. Those were her amber eyes, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. The doctors called it a medical miracle. I called it the answer to every prayer I had ever whispered into the silence of our empty bedroom. "I'm here, Claire. I'm right here," I sobbed, pressing her hand to my face. She smiled. It was the same slow, lopsided smile that had captured my heart in college. But as she looked around the room, there was a flicker in her eyes, a brief, sharp coldness that vanished so quickly I thought I had imagined it. Bringing Claire home was supposed to be the beginning of our happily ever after. The house was filled with the scent of lilies, her favorite flowers. I had spent a week deep cleaning her art studio, making sure every brush was in its place. She walked through the front door slowly, leaning on a cane. She paused in the foyer, looking at the large oil painting of the Amalfi Coast that we had bought on our honeymoon. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I asked, putting a supportive arm around her waist. "Yes," she said softly. "I've always loved the way the blue of the water matches the sky in France." I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. "Claire, that's Italy. We bought it in Positano. You spent 3 hours arguing with the shopkeeper over the price." She laughed, a light melodic sound. "Of course, Julian. My mind is still a bit foggy. The doctors said my memory would be like a puzzle with missing pieces for a while." "Don't be so sensitive." She patted my cheek and walked toward the kitchen. I stood in the foyer, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud. Claire never patting my cheek. She was a hugger, a clinger, and she never forgot a bargain. She was proud of her haggling skills. That night, as she slept, I watched her. The moonlight through the window turned her skin to porcelain. She looked perfect, too perfect. I remembered the accident. The car had rolled 3 times. She had suffered a deep laceration on her left shoulder from the shattered window. I had seen the surgeon stitching it. I had seen the raw, jagged line of the wound every day in the hospital. I carefully pulled back the silk strap of her nightgown. The shoulder was smooth. There was no scar, not even a faint white line. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I moved to the other side of the bed and checked her right shoulder. Nothing. I backed away from the bed, my heart racing. I went to the kitchen and pulled out the medical files I had kept from the hospital. Patient, Claire Vance, injury, 12-centimeter laceration to left deltoid. I looked back toward the bedroom door. If the woman in that bed didn't have the scar, she wasn't Claire. But she had Claire's face. She had Claire's fingerprints. The hospital had verified her identity. She knew the names of our friends. She knew the name of our dog, Buster, who had passed away 3 years ago. Wait. I stopped. I hadn't told her about Buster since she woke up. In the foyer, she had asked, "Where's the little guy? Where's Buster?" I had told her he was at my mother's house, but Claire had been there when Buster died. She had held him in her arms at the vet. She had helped me bury him in the backyard. The woman in my bedroom didn't just have missing puzzle pieces. She had the wrong puzzle. I spent the next 2 days acting like the doting husband, but inside, I was a detective in my own home. I began to notice small, terrifying details. Claire was left-handed. This woman used her right hand to stir her coffee. Claire hated cilantro. She said it tasted like soap. This woman ate the cilantro garnish on her salmon without a word. Claire had a small mole behind her ear. This woman's skin was flawless. I waited until she went for her physical therapy appointment. I went straight to her art studio. I searched through her old sketches, looking for anything. A clue, a sign. I found a hidden compartment in the back of her desk. Inside was a photograph I had never seen. It was Claire, standing next to another woman. They were identical, twin sisters. But Claire had never mentioned a sister. She told me she was an only child, that her parents had died in a fire when she was young. On the back of the photo, a single line was written in sharp, angry ink. One of us gets the life, the other gets the shadows. See you soon, sister. I realized then that the accident hadn't been an accident, and the miracle in room 402 wasn't a miracle at all. It was a hostile takeover. The woman, I couldn't call her Claire anymore, returned from her appointment with a radiant glow. She looked more like my wife than my wife ever had. She carried herself with a grace that felt practiced, almost theatrical. "Julian, darling, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, hanging her coat in the closet. She didn't look at the baseboard where I had hidden the photo. She was too confident. "Just work stress," I lied, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "I'm going to make some pasta for dinner." As I chopped the vegetables, I watched her through the reflection in the stainless steel microwave. She was looking at a shelf of books in the living room. Her fingers traced the spines until she reached Claire's journals. She pulled one out and began to read it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She wasn't reminiscing. She was studying. She was learning the script of a life she intended to steal. I realized I couldn't just call the police. Who would believe me? "Officer, my wife doesn't have a scar and she likes cilantro." They would think I was having a mental breakdown from the trauma of the accident. I needed proof. I needed to know who this woman was. And, more importantly, where the real Claire was. The next morning, I told her I had an early meeting in the city. Instead, I drove 3 hours north to the town where Claire told me she grew up. She'd always been vague about her childhood, claiming the St. Jude's Home for Children was a place of sad memories she wanted to forget. The building was now a dilapidated shell of brick and ivy. I found the local records office and spent 4 hours digging through microfiche files from 30 years ago. I found the intake records for 1994. Name: Claire Vance. Age: 5. But directly underneath her name, in the same handwriting, was another entry. Name: Camille Vance. Age: 5. Twins. Identical. I kept reading. In 1999, Claire was adopted by a wealthy family from the city, the family I knew as her parents. But Camille was left behind. She had bounced from foster home to foster home, a trail of behavioral reports and incidents following her like a shadow. The last record of Camille Vance was from 5 years ago. She had been released from a psychiatric facility after a breakdown involving the stalking of a high-profile woman. The pieces of the mirror were finally coming together. Camille hadn't just appeared. She had been watching us. She had been waiting for the perfect moment to step out of the shadows and into the light of Claire's life. I sat in my car in the rain, the records in my lap. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an unknown number. I answered, my breath hitching. "Hello?" Silence. Only the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing. "Julian?" It was a whisper. It was raspy. It was the exact same voice as the woman in my house, but it lacked the confidence. It sounded terrified. "Claire? Is that you?" I shouted into the phone. Don't let her see the basement," the voice whispered. "The floor, under the heavy rug. Julian, I'm so cold." The line went dead. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. Claire was alive. She wasn't just missing. She was being held somewhere. And if she told me not to let the impostor see the basement, it meant the basement was the key. I drove back home like a madman, arriving just as the sun was setting. The house was dark. I walked in, trying to keep my footsteps light. "Claire, I'm home," I called out. No answer. I went straight to the basement door. I opened it and flipped the switch. The stairs creaked under my weight. At the bottom, I saw the heavy Persian rug we had bought together. I dragged it aside, the dust choking me. Beneath it was a heavy wooden trapdoor I had never noticed. It was locked with a modern, electronic keypad, completely out of place in our old house. "Are you looking for something, Julian?" I spun around. Camille was standing at the top of the stairs. She wasn't holding a cane anymore. She was holding a heavy glass vase, and the look in her eyes was no longer cold. It was murderous. "I told you not to be so sensitive," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You were supposed to be the prize, Julian. A handsome husband, a beautiful house, a perfect life. Why did you have to go digging in the dirt?" "Where is she, Camille?" I demanded, backing away toward the trap door. "She's where she belongs," Camille hissed, stepping down the first stair. "In the shadows. I spent 30 years in the dark while she played in the sun. Now, it's my turn. And if you won't be my husband, then you'll just be another missing piece of the puzzle." Camille took another step down the basement stairs. The light from the single bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows against the concrete walls. In her hand, the heavy glass vase caught the light like a weapon. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, her voice chillingly calm. "We were born together. We shared the same heartbeat, but the world decided only one of us was worth keeping. They took her to a mansion, and they threw me into a cage." "That wasn't Claire's fault, Camille," I said, my fingers fumbling behind my back, trying to feel the edges of the keypad on the floor. "She didn't even know you existed. They told her she was an only child." "And she believed them," Camille screamed, the mask of the perfect wife finally shattering. "She lived her life in the sun, painting her little pictures, while I was drugged in clinics and beaten in foster homes. I watched her, Julian. I followed her for years. I saw her meet you. I saw her marry you. I saw the life I was supposed to have." I felt the keypad. It was cold, metallic. "The accident," I breathed. "You didn't just find her, you caused it." Camille smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "A simple nudge on a rainy road. I thought we would both die. I thought it would be a poetic ending, but when I woke up in the grass and saw her unconscious in the car, I realized God had finally given me a gift. I switched our clothes. I switched our rings. I even used a piece of glass to give myself her facial scars before the ambulance arrived. My stomach turned. She had mutilated herself just to play the part. Why keep her alive? I asked, trying to buy seconds as I guessed the code. Claire's birthday? Our anniversary? I tried our anniversary, 0612. Beep. The light on the keypad turned red. Wrong code. Because she's my backup, Camille said, now halfway down the stairs. In case I forgot a detail, in case I needed to know where a key was hidden. And besides, I wanted her to watch. I wanted her to hear us upstairs, living the life she lost. I tried another code. The date of the accident. 1104. Click. The lock hissed. The heavy wooden trapdoor popped open an inch. Camille lunged. She swung the vase with a feral cry, but I rolled to the left, the glass shattering against the concrete floor. I grabbed the edge of the trapdoor and flung it open. Below the floor was a small, soundproofed room. A storm cellar I never knew existed. It was lit by a single dim lantern. There, huddled on a thin mattress, was a woman. She was pale, her hair was matted, and she was wearing a dirty, oversized sweater. But when she looked up, I saw the scar, the jagged red line on her left shoulder. Julian, she croaked. Claire! I reached down to pull her out, but Camille was on me. She didn't have the vase anymore, but she had a shard of broken glass. She slashed at my arm, the pain searing through me. We tumbled toward the edge of the pit. You're not taking it back! Camille shrieked. It's my turn! I am Claire Vance! I am the wife! From the dark pit, a hand reached out. The real Claire, fueled by a sudden, desperate strength, grabbed Camille's ankle. Camille lost her balance, slipping on the smooth concrete. With a final desperate shove, I pushed Camille back. She fell into the pit, landing heavily on the mattress. Before she could stand, I slammed the heavy wooden trapdoor shut and threw the bolt. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the muffled screams and pounding from beneath the floor. I collapsed next to the rug, pulling the real Claire into my arms. She was shivering, smelling of damp earth and fear, but she was warm. She was real. She clung to me, her tears soaking my shirt. I tried to call you, she sobbed. She left her phone near the vent once. I only had a second. I know, honey. I'm so sorry. I should have known sooner. I looked at the trap door. The police would be here soon. The fingerprints would be checked again, properly this time. The medical records would be matched to the DNA. The miracle of room 402 was over. The sirens were the first thing that brought reality back to our quiet suburban street. Blue and red lights danced against the walls of our living room, reflecting off the shattered glass of the vase Camille had used as a weapon. The police didn't believe me at first. Who would? But when they lifted that heavy Persian rug and saw the electronic keypad, the atmosphere shifted. When they opened the trapdoor and found a woman who looked exactly like the one I was holding, but covered in the grime of a cellar, the world stopped spinning for them too. Camille didn't go quietly. As they pulled her from the pit, she was screaming my name, her voice a terrifying mimicry of Claire's most intimate tones. Julian, tell them! Tell them I'm your wife! She's the ghost! She's the shadow! I didn't look at her. I kept my coat wrapped around the real Claire, shielding her eyes from the monster that wore her face. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospitals and courtrooms. The medical world was fascinated. The miracle of room 402 was actually a case of extreme identity theft and psychological warfare. The DNA tests were conclusive. The woman with the scar on her left shoulder, my Claire, was the biological match to the Vance estate. Camille was a ghost in the system, a woman whose fingerprints appeared in foster care records but nowhere else. But the physical healing was the easy part. The psychological damage was a deeper wound. I can't look in the mirror, Julian, Claire whispered one night. We were back home, but the house felt haunted. I had replaced the rug and the basement door was now locked with 3 different deadbolts, but the memory stayed. When I see my face, I see her. I see the eyes that looked down at me through the floorboards. I took her hands in mine. They were still thin, her skin still pale from the lack of sunlight. She's gone, Claire. She's in a high-security psychiatric ward. She can never hurt you again. But she has my memories, Claire said, her voice trembling. She read my journals. She knows how I feel about the rain. She knows our secrets. She didn't just steal my life, she lived it. 3 months later, I received a letter from the state facility. Camille had refused to speak to doctors, lawyers, or journalists. She would only speak to me. Claire didn't want me to go, but I had to. I needed to see the mask one last time to make sure it was truly broken. I sat behind a thick glass partition. When Camille was let in, she wasn't wearing the silk dresses or the expensive jewelry she had stolen from our closet. She was in a gray jumpsuit, her hair lank and unwashed. She picked up the phone and looked at me. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just smiled. That slow, lopsided smile that used to make my heart melt. "Did you find the other sketches, Julian?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly normal, perfectly Claire. "Which sketches?" "The ones in the garden shed, behind the lawnmower. I drew them while you were at work. Sketches of us. Sketches of the life we were going to have after I finally got rid of the missing piece." I felt a chill. "You're never getting out, Camille." "Maybe not," she whispered, leaning closer to the glass. Her eyes were wide, dark, and empty, but every time you kiss her, you'll wonder. Every time she laughs, you'll listen for the echo. Because I wasn't just playing a part, Julian. I became her. And a part of me is still in that house, walking the halls, sleeping in your bed. I hung up the phone and walked out into the cold afternoon air. I went home and went straight to the garden shed. I moved the lawnmower. There, tucked into a plastic bag, were dozens of sketches. They were beautiful. They were haunting. They were exactly in Claire's style. But the subjects were different. They were drawings of me sleeping, drawings of us at the dinner table. But in every drawing, the woman next to me had eyes that were just a little too sharp, a smile that was just a little too wide. I didn't show them to Claire. I took them to the backyard and started a fire. As the flames consumed the paper, Claire came out onto the porch. She was holding a palette and a brush. For the first time since the accident, she looked toward her studio. "I think I want to paint something new today," she said. "What are you going to paint?" I asked, walking toward her. "A sunrise," she said, looking at me with her amber eyes. The real ones. A sunrise. Over a place we've never been. A place where there are no shadows. I took her hand, and as we walked into the house, I didn't look back at the ashes. The mirror was broken, but the light was finally coming back into the room. "Thank you for learning English with us. See you in the next video." Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel Storyline English, and turn on notifications to receive more emotional English learning stories in the future.